What is going on, YouTube? Andrew Miller from Hook'emHeadlines.com. Coming back at you today with kind of an in-depth breakdown of Texas's most recent portal addition. Texas landing a commitment out of the portal yesterday from the former Arkansas redshirt junior safety, fourth-year guy, Jalen Catalon. He committed to Texas a little less than 24 hours after a full-day visit that he took to Austin. Concluded this past Sunday on January 8th. He got to spend some time with Steve Sarkisian, safeties coach Blake Gideon, and some of the Longhorns defensive staff. Clearly that visit made a good impression on him. Like I said, he wound up committing less than 24 hours after the visit ended. So talk a little bit about what landed him at Texas. Covered him a little bit during his recruitment, since Texas was heavily involved there a lot of the way before he committed to Arkansas. And from what I know and my film study on his career at Arkansas, what got him to this point and what he can bring to the table for the Texas defense. So starting off here, kind of what landed him at Texas in the first place. He really fills a need right away for Texas. Sark and Gideon were making it pretty clear this offseason that they were looking for help in the defensive backfield, specifically at the safety position upon the departure of Anthony Cook. So that's the simple answer here, but more in depth. So Texas was, like I said, Texas was involved in Catalon's recruitment out of high school. He's from Mansfield in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, specifically Mansfield Timberview High School. He was a four-star kid coming out of Mansfield Timberview. Definitely one of the more highly touted safeties in the 2019 recruiting class. Some of the programs that were more heavily involved in his recruitment were Texas, Alabama, Clemson, Arkansas, of course. And so eventually Arkansas landed a commitment from him, got him in the 2019 class. Texas was pursuing him pretty heavily at one point. Craig Nivar was, I believe, the leading recruiter at the time on Tom Herman's staff, but Texas wasn't ultimately able to close on that recruitment. Ultimately ended up hurting the 2019 class because Catalon was pretty fantastic at Arkansas, at least when healthy. He was a pretty impactful player by his, very impactful player by his second year with that Arkansas defense. Got limited playing time as a true freshman in 2019, and then really was a full-time starter for the first time in 2020, and that's really where he came to life. During that season, ended up posting almost 100 combined tackles. It was 2 tackles for loss, a few interceptions, one of which he took back for a touchdown. I think it was 4 or 5 pass breakups, and he ultimately graded out as the second. It was the first or second best safety in the SEC, according to PFF defensive grades. So he was fantastic as a first-year full-time starter for Arkansas in 2020. And that was really the first year where you got to see what he could do. And at this point, really the only full season where he's been healthy. Because 2021 comes along and injury issues start to plague Catalon. Throughout the last 2 years, he's dealt with varying upper and lower body injuries, most recently of which I believe was a shoulder injury that he had surgery on. I believe he's had knee issues at different points in his career, and really just altogether has unfortunately dealt with a plethora of injuries that have limited to what he could do on the field. He played about a half dozen games in 2021, and this past season I believe he only played in 1 game before his season was over. So that'll be a big question mark with him, but I keep mentioning it. If he's healthy, he's going to be one of the best safeties in the Big 12, hands down. He proved that at Arkansas, extremely productive when he was actually on the field. I believe for his career, somewhere in the ballpark of 150 combined tackles. Let me pull it up here just to be sure. 160 combined tackles, 5 interceptions, around 10 pass breakups, 3 forced fumbles, 1 fumble recovery. He stands at 5'9", about 200 pounds, 5'9", 5'10", about 200 pounds. Granted, we'll see what he comes in at Texas, because just rehab programs, the limited action on the field, that can change the weight a little bit heading into spring ball. But he was tremendous, like I said, when he was on the field at Arkansas. Between his versatility, his football IQ, his play recognition, which feeds into the football IQ. He's seriously an impactful safety. Pretty much everyone that faced him in the SEC knows that. He can do a little bit of everything. So he was primarily boundary safety at Arkansas, and that's the role he's going to ultimately fill at Texas, but I'll dig into that here in a moment. One of the biggest strengths he brings to the table is his sure tackling ability, hard-hitting nature of his game for sure. I mentioned earlier the football IQ and play recognition. You combine all those and you really get a safety that knows how to find the ball and blow up plays in opposing teams' backfields. I'm going to, as I always try to do for these breakdowns, I'll include some film so you can, kind of get a look at Catalon's game if you're not super familiar, or maybe something a little bit more in depth, and you're going to see those pads popping a lot. He's a dude that plays really, really physical football. And I think that was a little bit to a detriment for him at Arkansas, just because, again, the upper body injury started to play him, especially this past season. But, that's one of the strengths he brings to the table, and the hope's going to be that, he's ready to go for 2023. Because what he can do in terms of just, generating negative plays, getting stops, he's someone that led the SEC in run stops among safeties in 2020, and he ranked in the top 5 again of all defensive backs in the SEC in run stop percentage in 2021. He was limited, though, again, to a half dozen games, as I mentioned earlier, because of injury. So it's clear the impact he can have on run defense coming out of the box, or if he's lined up, a little bit further into the defensive backfield, he can still come up a few levels and make some plays. So that's going to be something to watch, how he's able to translate that and see if he's able to come back and have that hard-hitting nature in his game. But also another one of his major strengths is just I mentioned the ability to find the ball, but that really translates in terms of his instincts and pass coverage. He can play man coverage if you want to spin him down and play more as like a slot corner covering someone out of the box or in the flats, but he can cover deep. I believe he ranked second in the SEC among defensive backs or at least among safeties in 2020 in terms of average depth of target. Essentially saying that, because it was a little north of 15 yards, essentially saying that he was getting targeted deep pretty frequently in coverage, and the longest reception that he allowed in pass coverage in 2020 was 16 yards. So he can cover the intermediate and the deep ball. He's really effective there, good at keeping the play in front of him. He's not the fastest guy in the world at safety, but I was looking somewhere and saw that he clocked in around 4.7, 4.75 for his 40 time at the opening a few years ago. And so not the fastest guy in terms of straight line speed, but again, I mentioned that instinct, football IQ, closing speed. As a safety, sometimes that's all you need. If you're in the right place, you can make the play on the ball. And that's certainly something that you'll notice when watching him on film is a lot of times it seems like he's just right place, right time, but to a certain extent, that's just being good at following the quarterback's eyes and just knowing where to be on the field in coverage. So I think he's going to be an absolutely fantastic addition to Texas in terms of what he showed in pass coverage at Arkansas. More in-depth on his coverage skills and some of his production, situational production as well at Arkansas. He graded out higher in zone coverage than he did in man coverage, and that's not super surprising for a safety. A lot of that was due to overall just lack of targets in man coverage. He was in the single digits in terms of targets in man coverage in his career at Arkansas. In zone coverage, he was targeted a little bit more frequently. In 2020, actually graded out as the second best cover safety in zone coverage in the SEC. And in 2021, still graded out among the top half in zone coverage targets. So he's proficient, I think, in both areas. It's just man coverage was a little bit more limited for him. I think a lot of what Texas is going to do with him in terms of, okay, you know what? I'll save that for a little bit. I'll save that until we get into the Texas side of things. But a few of the other areas of his game that I just really like. For one, I mentioned his hard-hitting nature. He's someone that can just set the tone for a defense. You know, this definitely wasn't the case last season, or this past season, but the season before, it just seemed like there was a lack of urgency sometimes on the Texas defense. And you really saw some leaders step up for them in 2022. And in Jalen Catalon, you're getting another guy that's just a tone setter, playmaker, someone that can just give a lot of energy and make all the other players around him better. Playing off of that, I think that he's someone that can be a tremendous mentor for a lot of the young and talented defensive backs that Texas has coming in. I think he had a similar impact on a lot of the Arkansas defensive backs, specifically at safety in the last couple of years. Again, someone when healthy that just can lead by example, is a good vocal leader in the locker room too. So those sorts of intangibles in his game, that sort of energy he brings to the table, it will do nothing but good things for the Texas defense. This is a good transition point, though. Kind of talk about how Catalon fits at Texas, and how I think PK and Gideon Jeff Choate are going to specifically use him. I mentioned it here and there in the video already, but I mean the natural fit for him is going to be at the boundary safety position. That's where he took the bulk of his snaps at Arkansas. He was lined up essentially as a free safety. Around a third of the time in terms of his defensive snaps at Arkansas, but a lot of times at Arkansas he was playing in a three high safety look, and a lot of times you're just going to be taking, in terms of how like PFF will zone out the fields, a lot of times that's just going to look like a free safety because you're playing a three high safety look. There could be multiple players that have kind of that same pre-snap look in the defensive backfield. So I think he's going to be a good candidate to be the immediate starter if he's healthy at the boundary safety position. He'll come in and be able to complement Jaron Thompson, the rising senior at field safety. Thompson had a really solid, really consistent 2022 campaign, and having someone that Texas can bring in and really not have any drop-off upon the departure of Anthony Cook at boundary safety. Thompson being able to play next to someone like that, like Catalon, I think is going to be tremendous for his game. One of the biggest factors in Jaron Thompson making so many strides, I think, this past season was not being asked to do too much. He was asked to command the field in coverage, and that was mostly it. Find where you're needed over the top or intermediate or in the flats, wherever that be, and make the play. He wasn't being spun down, having to cover for maybe a misplaced linebacker in run defense. He wasn't asked too much to blitz the passer or be a decoy coming out of the box. There was a lot of ways, I think, in 2021 that he was sometimes overstretched but also miscast. And so bringing in Jalen Catalon will help, I think, continue to solidify the role that Jaron Thompson can really shine in the secondary. Another, I think, big impact that Catalon's going to have at boundary safety is really just the fact that Texas is going to have someone that can, from the moment he steps on the field, set the tone in run defense. Texas is losing a pretty big playmaker and just a serious physical freak in DeMarvion Overshown at linebacker since he's headed for the NFL draft. And, assuming that Jalen Ford comes back and, a guy like Anthony Hill is also really solid in run defense, Texas is going to have a really, really tough box to run through. And a big reason for that, I think, is going to be Jalen Catalon. Again, I mentioned his production in run defense at Arkansas. It was no joke. He consistently ranked among the best run-stopping safeties and just defensive backs in general at Arkansas. Again, if healthy, I think the same is going to be said for him at Texas and in terms of where he ranks among safeties in the Big 12. So run defense, I think, is obviously going to be a huge part of this. Drop it back a little bit in terms of what he can do in pass coverage. And I think that's where Texas can get a little bit more special and even more versatile. Thompson is a guy that really is a good safety in pass coverage, graded out among the top half players at his position in terms of coverage grade in the Big 12 this past season. Really just didn't let a whole lot of plays get behind him, wasn't making a ton of mistakes, was making some big key down stops that you really didn't, at least for me, that I didn't really see out of Thompson in his first 2 years. So he really found his role and just in general knows where to be, knows how to command the field. You bring in a guy like Catalon, and it continues to make Jaron Thompson's job easier and allows him to excel more. I'm not trying to make this a Jaron Thompson video, but he is kind of the quarterback of the secondary in a way, so that is important in terms of how they can cohesively play together. But Catalon's going to give Texas some more options in pass coverage. I mentioned how he's good covering the intermediate and the deep ball. He has been tested like that before in the SEC, and he's passed a lot of those tests. He's not someone that lets the play get behind him a whole lot, which was a huge key for PK and the Longhorns this past season. Texas did a very nice job, at least through about the first 9 or 10 games of the season, keeping the play in front of them. And Catalon's a guy that will be able to help you do that. I think that, you're going to see him maybe starting out this coming season more in some zone coverage looks, but we'll see how that progresses, just because that was where he was a little bit more proficient and comfortable at Arkansas. But again, he's someone that when he was at Mansfield Timberview could do both. He's played in kind of that slot corner hybrid type role before, taking multiple snaps in those situations at Arkansas. So I think there's a few different ways that you can utilize him in that regard. But, Texas is just going to be kind of a man coverage beast of a defense next year, at least in the secondary. Ryan Watts is a guy that's already kind of a lot, like one of the best boundary corners, I think, in the Big 12. He was a tremendous surprise for Texas in 2022. And whether the field corner spot's going to be manned by, like, Terrence Brooks or, another incoming DB transfer, Gavin Holmes, Malik Muhammad, incoming 4 or 5-star, depending on the recruiting service you look at, incoming true freshman there. Texas has options at field corner. And you got Jahdae Barron likely coming back at the nickel spot. There's a lot of guys that are very formidable in coverage. And despite the losses of Deshaun Jamison and Anthony Cook, I don't think Texas I think, will actually have a more formidable secondary next year. And so that'll be pretty dangerous. I guess a few more things that I wanted to mention about Catalon and just in terms of how he fits at Texas. One thing is, again, I keep saying if healthy, but I think anyone that has followed Catalon knows that that's just the biggest factor with him, if he can stay healthy. But if so, I think one of the areas of his game that is worth watching is kind of the pass play tackling. In 2021, he was missing a higher rate of tackles than usual. I think part of that was due to lingering injuries. I think another part of that is just it can be difficult as a safety when you're playing. At that point, he was playing a higher percentage of zone coverage looks, and Arkansas secondary, was implementing more of I believe it was last year that I'll check on this just to be sure, but I believe it was last year when they were implementing more of that 3 high safety look under Barry Odom. And so that transition, I think, could have been a little bit slow. He's spreading out the field a little bit more, so but that can lead to more missed tackles in coverage. But still, he's going to have another transitioning point here, getting back from this injury. I think pass play tackling for the entire Texas defense is a major key, has been the last few years. But that's going to be an area of his game that I'm watching. And then another few factors for him, I've mentioned it, during his time at Arkansas, but I think that Jalen Catalon is a guy that can be a tremendous mentor to a lot of the young and talented DBs that Texas is bringing in and already has in the fold. Guys like Jalen Gilbo, Derek Williams, the incoming 5-star safety, Muhammad, I think, can learn something here. Maybe even like Michael Taft, B.J. Allen. There's a lot of younger guys that I think can learn from someone that's as well-rounded, as much of a playmaker, and just that kind of leaves it all out on the field the way that Catalon does. Just at times he really just looks like kind of a firecracker out there that, once he gets his sights set on you, it's pretty much play, game over, whatever. So anyway, that's pretty much it. Wanted to kind of touch on some of the different areas of Catalon's game and, what he brings to the table as Texas's 3rd portal addition so far in the 2023 transfer class. We will be coming back. It's either going to be later today or tomorrow, getting this video up later this week, talking about Shane, Tark, and myself looking ahead for Texas for the 2023 season now that we have concluded the college football season officially with Georgia winning the title over TCU. So anyway, that's pretty much it. Welcome.